All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to be talking about a conference that I attended last week, and it was related to parenting decolonized. And it's something that I think is very relevant. It's changed my perspective on parenting. And I thought it would be good to share also because we're really thinking about these important topics, especially now, due to the pandemic, but also due to recent events in Calgary. And so there's going to be a few different authors that I'm going to cover, and so I will discuss that as we go. So just quickly, parenting decolonized. It's about healing our trauma, how that heals the world. I love that session by Antoinette Cooper, so we'll cover that. It leads to this world without the carceral state. It's going to talk a little bit about how we unschool the tiger parent within. So the first one I want to talk about is Antoinette Cooper, Healing Our Trauma Heals the World. And what I did is, when I did this course, my wife said, you've got to have like action items for each one of the ones that you attend. And that's what I did, is I wrote down action items for each. And so I wanted to share that with you today. So the first action item is accept healing as part of the process of being human. Second, allow your kids to cry and build our capacity to handle their emotional outbursts. And three, don't just go and read stuff on the internet. Commit the time that is needed for self-healing and commit the time for family healing by finding a safe community to share vulnerable stories. Now, if your experience with grandparents causes more trauma, then spend less time with them. We are not more powerful than our environment. These are powerful parenting statements that we got from Antoinette Cooper that I want to share with you today. Now, if we look at the core of reconciliation, we are dealing with trauma. And unless we come up with a vocabulary to talk about and create support around different types of trauma, it's going to continue to silence the trauma that is happening within. So Antoinette had to let go of bringing her mom along. Ultimately, you can't force someone else to transform. Oh, Alice is here. Yay. Thank you so much, Alice. It's an honor to have you again. Thank you. Appreciate it. So in this Parenting Decolonized conference, Antoinette, in her session about trauma healing the world, said that silence is the tool of oppressors because it prevents healing. So I remember when I was a kid, maybe, I don't know if you had these, the yo mama jokes, yo mama's so fat jokes. She's saying that these kind of jokes can be a form of violence, because if you were a Black parent, like you would feel this like deeply insulted by these. And the question is, like, we're so used to this type of violence. Like, who could we be if we didn't have this violence anymore? It's such a part of our culture. We're not even sure who we are without this. So if you overcome trauma, you become a vessel for creation. You know how we've been talking all this time about moving from sedation to relation to creation. But what if dealing with the moving from sedation to relation required us to deal with our trauma? If you dwell in trauma, you'll never think outside of the status quo. And that is really interesting to me, is like this box that we live in, this status quo, Antoinette is saying, is because we live in trauma and we don't know how to get out of this trauma. And so when it comes to reimagining what reconciliation looks like, the question is, who's doing the imagining? It can't come from the oppressors only, like the people who are causing the problems to start with. And when we refer to this, we sometimes think, oh, this must be like certain cultural groups. No, Parenting is passing the baton. And the question is, what wounds do you pass on to the next generation? Our children cannot be their authentic selves if we, the parents, first are still traumatized. And so we have to take away social emotional healing as this negative thing. It has the same continuity as breathing in and out. It's a part of the human experience. So healing's like breathing, bringing a healthy expectation to it. It's like, hey, I need some time for my mental health. I need some time for healing. This is really good. One of the things I loved about Antoinette Cooper's presentation was that she said, healing honestly is a natural state of our body. If you think about it, like if we physically get hurt, let's say we have a cut somewhere on our arms or our hands or somewhere, it'll start to heal. We'll see it healing. It's a natural state of our bodies. And it's a natural state of our emotions, and it's a natural state of our spirit. It is what every part of our body wants. And so what she explained, what Antoinette explained, and this is the first session that I really it really blew me away. It's not about what are you doing to heal. It's about what are you doing to interrupt that healing. Don't suppress, express. She's saying practice repair regularly and intentionally. And I thought that was so powerful. That was so powerful. I mean, she said that if a child is crying, let them cry. We interrupt these natural ways of healing all the time. We tell kids, don't cry. Don't cry. Stop crying. But if we interrupt and we build if we look at this interrupt and we build our own capacity to be with the way that we naturally heal, we will be much more powerful in terms of our own dealing with self-trauma. Sometimes this means that we have to build up our skill set. Maybe we need to do more meditation. Maybe we need to think a little bit more before we react. Maybe it's doing journaling. One phrase that I loved from the conference was that crying isn't the hurt. It's the healing from the hurt. And so if you're crying, you're healing. So congratulations. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And so how can we create, as parents, this oasis where children feel safe? We got to look for community where people are developing this capacity for hard conversations. And that's the problem. It's like, where do you go on the internet to find a community of people having hard conversations? And wounds happen not just on an individual level, but also on a collective level. Like, for example, Antoinette said the Black body was traumatized when people sat and watched the person who was hung. Suppression and control is not healthy. It cuts people off from our collective humanity. It doesn't serve as the expansion of us all. And I thought that was interesting. We need community. We cannot solve this on our own. Where is that judgment-free community? It made me think this is why we created AI parenting, is to create that community so that people could grow and learn together. Dealing with trauma will cost you, as will not dealing with it. Antoinette said she had this trauma bond that she had in her own marriage. And she had to leave her marriage it was costing her health. It was this fear of doing the work. And some of her statements were very empowering. She said, it's your birthright to have the resources for healing. You are worthy of healing, and you deserve healing, and it is your right to have it. And so a lot of parenting is about trauma and re-experiencing that trauma like when we speak to our children about the trauma that we experienced as a child, we also need to see if that's still happening. Do what we need to do in order to protect, like we do what we need to do in order to protect our kids. We have to ask, like, body, like for the physical body or nature, like what does the seed need? Right? Like what do we need in order to flourish? We need protection in order to flourish. So for Antoinette, she said that it took a while for the grandparents to have calmed themselves. But sometimes when you can talk about, like, hey, this caused me trauma, those can give an opportunity for them to shine again in the relationship. But you may need to pause. I think she had to take like a year off in order to get to that state. So when it comes to words that we need to learn in school, I asked this question specifically to Antoinette, which was one of the beauties of having it live. She said that we need to learn more about trauma. We need to have a better vocabulary around our feelings. How do we describe and talk about our feelings and what we're going through? We need to have better words around our emotion and our embodiment of those emotions, or maybe our disembodiment when we are suppressing those emotions, so that we can give this flavor around trauma and make it feel normal. She's describing the body is this place to study, how the body experiences trauma and how the emotions experience trauma. Letting people know that trauma doesn't mean forever. There's post-traumatic stress, PTSD, post-traumatic stress, PTSD, yeah. But there's also post-traumatic growth. The more we express and complete, the more we move to post-traumatic growth. She said that there's self-healing and then there's collective healing. We talked about this before, and the work isn't complete without both of them. So doing things in the community helps get healing through the vulnerable sharing of the others. So when other people, like let's say you're in a community and people are sharing, like, honestly, man, I'm going through some really, like, these are the things that I'm really going through. That can bring healing, not only to yourself, but it brings healing to other people. Some people may not have a community, and maybe they're afraid or they've been wounded in the past by their community. So our natural trauma response is to isolate. It's to avoid people. And so we need to ask the question, who is the community that we attach to? Does this community have the integrity that we're looking for? And if not, we've got to leave. We've got to make that decision that we are worthy of that healing. We are worthy of reparation. We are worthy of great mental health. And acknowledging that we, as parents, even unconsciously, are contributing to trauma through what we do and how we naturally react, how we were raised. Practicing repair and understanding what repair looks like, and restore this integrity with people. Like, we have high expectations for people. We trust other people. We have this integrity with people. One of the things that Antoinette said is that people are reading themselves into a frenzy, and it becomes this only performative act. Don't be afraid, like me, like put your foot in your mouth. Be a pioneer, right? Be vulnerable. Make mistakes. Learn and repair. Activism without action is just acting. Ira X, who was a presenter prior to Antoinette Cooper, said that we need to lean into action. Yeah, we all make mistakes. An example that she showed was speaking about the LGBTQ2 community. But we are learning, like we're not perfect. We need to lean into that. Yeah, maybe what she said caused some harm, but we can correct those things. We can apologize for that. Yeah, we can feel embarrassed, but there's plenty of relationships where we've been a hot mess. And if we're doing this work, we're going to be making mistakes. And that's a good part of it. And so her message, Antoinette Cooper's message, was commit to creating the world that you want, where everyone has the full experience of self-expression. It's this paradigm shift from conquering and conquest to connection and divinity. And so lots of words, lots of complicated stuff. I don't know if it's making sense, but to me, her message of you're worthy, you're not going to get it right at the beginning. And this healing, this process of healing is this having this vocabulary around it, normalizing it, making it something that we talk about and it's okay, is very important. And I have my own trauma that I have to deal with as well. And so I hope that makes sense. What I'm going to do is Antoinette Cooper. I'll just put her name into the chat. Net Cooper. Just so that you're aware. I think this is an important message. I think every session from here, this conference called the Parenting Decolonized conference was so insightful. It gave me a lot of insights as a parent, and it really changed my perspective on education, on parenting, and it gave me like kind of a piece to it. And I wanted to share that with you today because I felt that, we talk about AI parenting. A lot of AI parenting is the parenting part because there's this social emotional control that you need, that you've gone through in your own life. And unless we've dealt with that side of things, like the AI stuff is just going to make things worse, right? So Christina is asking, well, what is this discussion about? Well, this discussion is about a conference that I attended recently called Parenting Decolonized. And it talks about a way of thinking about parenting as a type of oppression, as a type of colonization that's happening at home. And that if we want to change what happens in our world, we got to start by changing what happens at home. And what I've done is this week, the only focus is just on a few books that are some of the authors. And I'm going to be going through what some of those authors said during this conference, which I hope can inspire you. And I'm hoping can also give you some insights that maybe you weren't aware of. This may be too long for some people to fit into like a very short period of time, but it's okay. Like I'll record these, I'll edit them, and we'll make them available to you as well. I think that each one of these could be its own talk. Each one was an hour long. So I'm taking an hour long and then shortening it down into like 5-10 minutes of the key points that I got. So I hope that helps, Christina. Now, the next was a panel. Several speakers were talking about this world without the carceral state. And many of you know that the carceral state is just like the one about the school to prison pipeline. It's about prison. And I want to give you some action items right at the start, and then I'm going to give you like the details. So the first action item was use restorative justice with kids. Don't isolate them. Instead, ask questions like, who was involved? What really happened? What needs to happen in order to make things right? Involve them in the restoration. Powerful. The second was show role models of the best practices or accomplishments that you want them to achieve. And ideally, they're people who are like you, as close to you as possible. And then the third is give our kids, our own children, more agency and expect more accountability from them. So the panelists included Cozine, who I think I'll give you a little bit more of his story later, Victoria Burton Harris, Yusuf Bunchi Shakur, and it was hosted by Danielle C. Dunn, and it was really incredible. And so let me explain this. So it started off talking about the 13th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment is the one about forced slavery. So forced slavery and servitude is illegal except as punishment for a crime. And that's really important. So there's still slavery and there is still servitude if you are found guilty of a crime today, 2021. And this is happening a lot in our society. And they ask the question, what mindset does your child get when you enter a school greeted by an armed school resource officer, like who's packing weapons, metal detectors, and you see punitive measures in your classroom, such as no tolerance suspensions? Some schools, like I'm talking like preschool children, have to go through metal detectors. They're saying that responding punitively is not restorative. It does not allow them to reflect on why they caused the harm. And more importantly, it doesn't allow us to reflect as a society on how we, as a society, have failed this individual who has been segregated from the rest of our society. For example, we don't ask education, mental health, poverty questions when we punish. When people act out, they don't develop this appreciation for what happened. Like restorative measures can also be for those who do the harming. It's not only for the people who harmed. This message from Cozine was really good. Like, there are no bad people. Everyone has value. Everyone can be redeemed. They need to know that they have value. They need to know how they can be redeemed. And this is the gap. This is the thing that's missing. And so a system of true justice needs to be restorative. And we think like, oh, this just applies to prison. It just applies. No, this applies to parenting. As parents, when something happens, we feel we have to punish. We must. But the message from this panel was we need to connect before you correct. Connect before you correct. You know, fear, it holds back restoration. We don't welcome others with open arms when we feel like afraid and uncomfortable. As a parent, we worry. We tell our kids, you better be scared, or you better be afraid of this, because that's how we were raised. And so we pass the baton, as Antoinette was saying, we pass on the fear. Now, a little bit about Cozine. So Cozine, who was one of the panelists, he went to prison at 17 years of age for 20 years. And one of his messages was, he says, it's hard to believe that you can achieve great things if you never see any role models that look like you. And I've heard this before. It's like, it's hard. People don't, if they only see certain types of like races represented in the examples, like the great examples of history that you learn in social studies, then you're never going to think that, yeah, this is something that's achievable by me. And Cozine went on to say, when you go to prison, it's like you're going to your room for 30 days and you're making your bed and only talking to certain people. You feel like you're being treated like a child. Why? Why do you feel like you're being treated like a child? Because your upbringing gave you that. We say we as parents are preparing our kids for school. But are we really preparing our kids for prison? It's a bold statement that he said, but it made me think like, wow, yeah, like this punitive discipline, we use it all the time at home, in the families, with our kids. And it's the same kind of mechanism that's used in our society. So what can we do that's different? How can we move in a different path, a more restorative path? Find opportunities to involve our children in restoration instead of punishing Ask, what were you thinking at the time? Who was involved? What really happened? What do you think? What did you think after you realized what happened? What effects did this have on you and others? What needs to happen in order to make things right? Give them power, give them control, give them agency. Set them up to be forever in control of their own lives, because ultimately we will have to give up that control eventually. The interesting thing was, he says, children don't need us to make decisions for them. And you'll see this as a recurring theme. Justice as a society, it means that it cares enough about you to give you freedom and a high level of accountability. And as parents, we want that same level. We want to give them a high level of freedom, but also a high level of accountability. And justice as revenge or punishment doesn't lead to this restoration. So we can't expect restoration when we lose agency, when we feel alienated and we aren't empowered to care for ourselves. And this is an important theme. Like when they don't feel empowered, they don't feel responsible. So you'll hear more about this theme, about you don't empower them, you take all the decisions away and you do things for them. If things go wrong, like they don't do well in school, it's not their problem. Right? Like they don't feel responsible at all. But also stop going to separation when they do something wrong. We put people in a cage and we expect that they all will be well. But it doesn't, of course. We can co-create the solution. And instead of separating, go towards those restorative questions. Young people today are angry, but they don't know why. And our answer shouldn't be to separate them. Rather, like the mission is to get to that why. Our solution may be to pluck them out of the classroom. But as adults, we also need to believe that these restorative practices work. They need to believe that their people are more than, say, a grade or a household income. We can't expect children to rise above if we put them in these environments that are harmful to them. So that one was like a heavy one, I think, because it deals with punishment. But it made me think like this theme of restoration is all about giving more power and more agency, while at the same time giving more accountability. And what I'm learning is that this freedom is the same thing that we talk about in AI parenting, about moving from sedation, relation to creation. As you move from each one of those levels, they are given more responsibility. They are given more agency over their own lives. When they're ultimately creating their own futures, that's what we want. But it also means they need to be way more accountable. And so I thought, wow, this is really fantastic. And it was not only, I just want to be clear, like this session was not only, this conference was not only Black presenters. In fact, like the person that I'm going to be speaking to next, Iris Chen, she's Asian, did a session called Unschooling the Tiger Parent. And I love this session because as a Asian, like we're all like, oh yeah, everything's got to be super strict. We're all about tiger parenting, like high levels of control. So what does Iris Chen have to say? So I hope that makes sense. Iris Chen, this is called, she calls it untigering, is Iris Chen untigering. So she actually has a book out on this one. It's a very interesting one. So the action items that I took away from this session, number one, is we need to talk about how we were tiger parented and how we are passing the baton and tiger parenting our own children. The second is we need to do projects based on our child's interests, and we need to connect that to what they need to learn to get to the next steps. And the third is we need to empower our kids to choose their own path and allow them to fail if they choose not to do things like their homework. And fourth is we need to look at how empowering our kids helps us reduce our own anxiety around the outcomes. And this is what I was talking about before. So in 1840, Horace Mann, many know, was the secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education. He traveled to Prussia seeking a way to transform these unruly children into disciplined citizens. The Prussian educational system sought to create obedient workers and soldiers, well-subordinated servants and clerks, and citizens who all thought alike. Again, thinking alike, very important in the Prussian system of education. So deschooling or unschooling is about recognizing our child's innately curious nature and realizing that we don't need to be a taskmaster. We need to trust them to lead the way. And we can find education not only in the classroom, in the school, but we can find it in nature and outside of the classroom. Iris's message was that education doesn't really prepare you for adulthood. It prepares you to be a cog in the system. So, for example, if Pythagorean theorem isn't relevant for your goals, then what should you learn instead to better prepare you for the future? So this really addresses the concern of when am I going to use this in the real world that you hear all the time in schools? Like ask, well, what will they need that school isn't teaching them today? And that's what a lot of parenting is. Like AI parenting is all about like, what are we missing from school? You know, that they don't teach today that we need to know. We need to move from forced learning to interest-based learning. And this notion of consent, this notion of agency is a recurring theme. It's amazing. Like it's really opened up my eyes to this perspective. Like when you've been told what to do your whole life, it's really, really hard to make good decisions when you have more freedom, right? Like you have to try and you have to fail. You have to make good decisions. You have to make bad decisions. And when we empower children to share their own passions and find their own path, here's the benefit for us parents and adults is we feel less anxiety around being responsible for the outcomes of their lives. For example, if we control everything, tiger parent style, and they fail a test, we blame ourselves. And our child does not feel responsible at all. I just did whatever you told me to. Not my problem. Let them fail the test. Let them fail the test. It'll teach them about consequences for the long term. What's the consequence if you fail a test? Are you going to go back a grade? I know a lot of parents worry about that. I had a parent call me. He's like, oh, I'm really worried. I'm like, you have nothing to worry about. They didn't hand in an assignment. It does not mean that they're going to like be held back. If anything, they're going to learn more. Unschooling is about resisting this system of oppression by giving children agency to be their authentic selves and to discover who they are through, well, failures and successes. It conditions them to expect consent when it comes to what they learn. And it gives them the ability to push back and have their own ideas about what they will do. I love this idea. Like it's so crazy, but like what if everything that you learned in school, you required consent? And if I do not consent at the beginning of like this module, and I have all these questions and I don't believe that it's ever going to be useful, then we don't teach it and we don't learn it. Because the reality is, like, if you've already made that decision at the beginning, what are you going to learn after they go through this? It's like, yeah, I'm just going to run through all these PowerPoints. I like this idea too, says Co. I love it. Thanks for joining us. So I love that, and I thought like consent, we don't ask for enough consent, but if the more like to me, it's like, what does agency mean? Agency is just consent. And so you want to give people more agency, ask them, are you okay with us learning this? And if they say no, it's like, okay, either I got to step up my game as to why you need to learn this, or we're not learning it. It's not to say that I won't teach the curriculum. I'll still teach the curriculum. But my responsibility as an adult or as a parent or as a teacher is no teaching you stuff that you don't consent to. If you are not bought into it, we're not learning it. So what does a typical day of this unschooling look like? Well, just like everybody's having breakfast. It could also be doing projects based on their interests. It could be projects that are inspired by gaming. A lot of kids like Minecraft or Roblox. For example, creating these Procreate images that are drawn as a modification for Roblox. Why not? That's a way of learning. You can write stories about Minecraft. You need to learn writing anyways. Why not write it about the thing that you love? Learning to code may be kind of boring unless it's coding in your favorite game. And one of the things that she says was very important was having meals together to reflect and having a regular rhythm where kids can expect some things like play dates and play days and park days. Like if there's times where they want to play video games, like give them some predictability there. Now, not everybody can work this just kind of fly on the seat of your pants. Some kids definitely prefer more structure. So in those kind of cases, a schedule could provide much more predictable times to play together or to watch movies. But it's about being intentional. And this is important. Like, it's not just about how we're raising our kids, but being intentional about talking about how we were raised and standing in the shoes of our children when we talk about what they would like for the future. We ask, how does our own practice gatekeep for this type of oppression? And I loved it. You can't expect them to make good decisions if they never have a chance to make those decisions, as we've learned. And you can't expect them to make to learn stuff if they don't want to. They're just going to refund it, not learn it anyways. And so this notion of no learning without consent, very powerful. So Untigering, you can search it on Amazon. It's a book you can buy. It's very interesting to me. I love the concept of it because we've been, especially in Asian cultures, it's very common. Very common. It's super strict. You will do this or else there will be punishment. This is not something we're used to. And I will say, as myself, how I was parented it was very strict. It was the same, right? And yeah, maybe things turned out okay, but there's a lot of things that I could have learned which were actually quite interesting, but I didn't because I thought that they were boring. I had the wrong mindset. I had the wrong attitude about them since day one. Ko says, yes, me too. So I love it. I love it. So I hope that's making sense. The next up, I want to talk about how much time I got. I don't want to go too long. Probably this will be the last one that I'll cover. The last one was Leslie Priscilla. And she talked about Latinx parenting. And I like this one. Latinx parenting. I like this one a lot, actually. Some of the major takeaways from Priscilla's Latinx parenting were the action items I had was number 1, avoid the use of you always or you never. Makes sense? Number 2, watch for feeling like a burden to other people, because this is a clear indication that there is a wound that we need to heal. And number 3, allow for physical and emotional boundaries and for observing how our own bodies react to these emotional situations. Now, this is interesting. So her message was that like we become our parents in all of their wounded selves unless we investigate and inquire. Like we literally carry their burdens onto the next generation unless we investigate and inquire ourselves. If we start to micromanage what our kids are doing, we start to yell, and we have to ask, are we being hard on them because we're being hard on ourselves? And that, come on, I like honestly for myself, that's often the case. It's like, yeah, I'm hard on myself all the time, right? There's this saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. How we nurture our children translates into every other aspects of our lives. Sometimes, for example, we have this fear of being public in any way, like if other people know, because we don't want other people to know what's happening in our lives because we're ashamed of ourselves. We have this personal shame inside. Or maybe we see others like, oh, they've got this fancy car and we feel bad about ourselves. Like we don't have the ability to celebrate with other people, to go, wow, congratulations. She was saying, Leslie, I love this. She's saying like, sometimes she would charge like $10 for a workshop and someone would complain, your price is too high. It's too high of a price. Like it should be free. And so she would feel this type of shame around like, why isn't this free? It's like, but she's saying that no, like we should not feel shame for wanting to provide values to others by working hard for many, many years. We should not feel shame by wanting to provide for our own families. And she's saying like this notion of parenting decolonized is that there's this colonizer in our own heads. And we need to kill the colonizer that is in our own heads. And we need to tell ourselves that we are worthy. We need to reconnect with our inner child. There's this lie that we tell ourselves that we are a burden. But the truth is, you're not a burden. In fact, you are deserving. And so the lies that come have a lot to do with maybe how we were trained, or like to not think about ourselves and to think about other people. But we think less of ourselves perhaps because of that. And so I love that. And I thought, wow. And she also says like reconnecting to our own bodies about what the truth is inside is very, very important. And she says that the words you never or you always is actually a wound. It's a wound as words. Do we just need a nap? Our basic, like your basic needs are not a burden to others. There is no shame in acknowledging what you need to be well. We can't always defer to our kids' preferences. And I do this all the time. It's like, oh, what do you want? You want to watch this video? Okay, fine. No. What we want matters too. Saying to our kids, you know what? It's really boring because we've done this 10 times, so that they know that what you're doing, like this pains you, is important. Boundaries matter. And I never thought about this way, but I find it more and more interesting. It's about consent and children's own physical bodies. Give children control over their own bodies. And when they say like don't touch me, like be respectful of it. Maybe we allowed people to trample on our boundaries when we were kids. And ultimately, the parenting to prison pipeline is all about boundaries being trampled on. And so like people trampled over your boundaries. They didn't let you control your own body. They didn't let you control what you did. They did all these other things that disrespected your boundaries. And as a result, you felt no agency. And with no agency, you felt no responsibility as well. And so, being disconnected from our own bodies is a system of oppression. So getting to know our bodies may feel unfamiliar, But taking time to experience sensations without judgment is a important skill. And she often, when Leslie is doing consulting, she will ask people about their parents, and she will just look at their bodies while moving. This was an incredible experience. And she'll go, well, are you noticing like any like movements of your stomach, like contractions of your stomach, or like shaking when you're around a particular person? Like during the consulting, Leslie might say, like, did you even notice this with your body when you talk about your mom? It's very interesting. Like our bodies react before we even think about it. These are like instantaneous reactions. And I love how Leslie was able to kind of point out like this notion of understanding our own physical bodies is so much a part of control. It's so much a part of understanding. Like this, one of the reasons why we don't heal is we don't even know the signals. We don't even know the signals from our own body that something is wrong. We're so tuned out, like we're so used to ignoring those signals that it just causes more problems. When asked, like, well, Leslie, like, what's the perfect world? What does the ideal world look like for you? Leslie said she just wants the world to heal. She wants us to be in relationship to one another and the earth, as opposed to being in relationship and woundedness and disconnection. So we'll be so much more fulfilled. And her message was very interesting. Like we think about decolonizing and all of this stuff about like oppression as like we need to fight against existing systems. But she says, no, we don't need to do that. We don't need to fight against existing systems. Instead, if we spend our effort creating the future that we would like to see, we're going to be that much closer to where we need to be. So I hope that made sense. I've kind of mentioned a few things. Oh man, I have 15. Okay, maybe one more, because I did mention Mr. Chaz, and I do want to be ready for that as well. So I hope this made sense. If you have any questions, please feel free, pop them into the chat. Mr. Chaz has a huge following. Like he's probably one of the biggest on, I think, TikTok and Instagram. He has huge followings, like hundreds of thousands. And so it was really like, it was amazing to hear him directly. And so his session was on like moving from coercion to control, and from and also to connection and collaboration. And so some of the actions that I took from his session were, one is to control the environment more and our children less, and understand what the different age levels look like by speaking with others that have kids that are the same age about our own experiences. And then the second was to help our children notice their own bodies. It's interesting, like so much of this like mental health, the awareness stuff is like body awareness. Recognizing that kids have a lot of energy. Hey, I noticed you got a lot of energy. Maybe you'd benefit from doing this physical activity. Yeah, let's go for a run. Let's do a Just Dance. Right? So helping children notice their own bodies, that they've got a lot of energy. This is amazing. Use less yelling and more talking to them at their level. And by their level, I mean their height level. Like go down to the height of your kids and speak to them like that. And of course, show more interest in their interests. Now, when it comes to kids, like children learn to make responsible decisions through experience. And this is a theme that was repeated throughout the Parenting Decolonized conference. They already know what to do. What they don't know is the consequences. Like, for example, a child already knows how to climb on the couch, But they don't know the risk of falling off the couch, right? Because they haven't experienced that yet. So yes, we as parents, like, we're giving them more control and agency, but there's that safety component. Like, what if they hurt themselves? What if they jump onto the street? We need to control the hazards, but we don't need to control the child. And like, going back to this theme of like punishment, we talked about the carceral state. Punishment doesn't just affect the child, it affects us, the parents, as well. There's always a gap between knowing better and doing better, like the Maya Angelou like statement. But there's a gap between the two. If we focus on closing that gap, it's going to make it easier to meet that expectation. But knowing, again, like, people read themselves into a frenzy and they do nothing about it. There's a big gap between knowing better and doing better, the action. So what's that first step for doing, right? We need to ask that question. There's this irony of punishing our child for their own safety. Like, I'm punishing you because it's for your own safety. I mean, they have energy in their own bodies. So they're fidgeting, they're moving around. But we punish this. Help them understand their own bodies. So if they're like running and they're bouncing off the walls, it's like, I see you've got a lot of energy. Did you want to like walk outside or, do a just dance inside? Of course, parents, like, kids' brains, they work differently, as we know. But sometimes, like, both parents and teachers may not see how they work differently if we're focused on punishment rather than a plan to help them meet these expectations, these high expectations that we have for them. And as parents, we need to develop the skill of understanding, obviously, what is developmentally appropriate. So having a meltdown because you said no to something that your kid really, really wanted, that's normal. Patience doesn't come from resisting anger. It comes from understanding. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is like, they're trying to build the skill of understanding or building our own capacity. And so there are, like, we talk about like the thinking fast, thinking slow, the Daniel Kahneman, but I like this, the way that Mr. Chaz explained it was a little bit easier. He says, like, there's these animal survival parts of our brain that develop first. So the animal survival parts develop first. Then the prefrontal cortex, all the stuff for reasoning, they develop last. And so it's normal for emotions to get the best of us when we're tired and overwhelmed. It can be hard to access all that logic and reasoning when we are stressed. And so understanding, like, what do we need in order to respond appropriately is very important, but also for our own kids. They react in the same way because maybe they haven't developed that prefrontal cortex to the extent that we have. I love this phrase. Your child is not giving you a hard time. You are having a hard time. They're not challenging behaviors. Your child is not having challenging behaviors. But the behaviors that are challenging me as an adult, I thought, like, to me, I love that. Amazon customer just said, hey, just wanted to say how much I'm enjoying the stream. I just had a baby recently, and this is putting me at ease. I'm so happy to have you join us. Thank you so much. So, building our capacity as adults, like, it's not that our child is giving us this hard time, it's giving us these challenging behaviors, but these behaviors are challenging me and my capacity as an adult. And I, as an adult, am needing to learn these skills. And it's okay to yell, stop, if a car is coming. But we tend to yell for everything. Pick the stuff off the floor. I told you dinner's ready. right? That's the problem. We're not always doing this for their safety. We're like, we just becomes the default for us. And it's not our fault. Like who teaches this stuff? Like you don't go to like classroom, by the way, before you become a parent, why don't I give you like a course on parent? No, like you just run in, you're a parent, just like that. How much for your hat? I love it. I almost hit a child with a RAV4. Oh, a RAV4. It's nothing to joke about. Exactly. We take safety very seriously, and we need to. And I think that we need to understand the difference between those so that there's a clear separation. And when we're yelling for everything, think about that. What does that mean for the safety thing that we meant? It means less. Like they think that everything's just yelling all the time. So how much is that message getting through that I really need to pay attention to that safety? That's what I'm worried about. It's not that we don't care about their safety, but we need a clear separation between the signals that we send when we're saying this is for your safety, you need to pay really close attention, and the everyday signals that we send. And when there is no difference between the two, that is where we run into challenge. I understand. Thank you for clarifying. I was so worried. Yeah. No, we need to take safety very seriously, but we need to separate those signals because our kids are not understanding the difference between the two. We need to be proactive when kids are putting themselves at risk, 100%. And one of the things that I liked was Mr. Chaz has this fun street safety song. And I don't know. Okay, I'm going to try to perform for you guys. I don't know if this is going to work. But we'll see. So it says, when we walk across the street, we look both ways. When we walk across the street, we look both ways. I hold my mama's hand. When we cross, we have a plan. When we walk across the street, we look both ways. So safety doesn't have to be boring. It can be fun. And we can show interest, not just with our words, like, oh, that's so wonderful. Oh, that's great. But we can also show it with our bodies. If we go up to them at their eye level and we talk to them, that shows an interest in the things that they love. And you'll find, like, what's interesting about this automatic body language is that they tend to listen to us more. When our bodies show that we care, their bodies show that they're listening more. Another thing it's safety related is hitting, right? So kids, like one kid hits another. It can happen for a variety of reasons, including overcrowding, role play, like they're playing, or just frustration. But the key here is to learn what caused the hitting. And this is interesting. Threshold stimulus. Yeah. They reach a certain threshold, or they're stimulated to this certain threshold, and they reach a point where they're like, I have to react. I have to do something. And when they talk about, oh, we need to change the laws, I think this is interesting. Mr. Chaz says, like, yeah, people do need to change. But the change needs to happen at home. It's not just the lawmakers. It's like the politicians are there to represent the people, and the people need to change what their expectations are or what they're expecting before there's going to be a change in the politics. And so what does this mean in the home? Like, you want to change the world, change your home. You want to change like a community, change your own home, and then use that to influence other people. I thought, oh, I love this. Says, I have a 45-year-old cousin who does role plays as a baby often. What would you say about someone in this kind of situation? I feel like the same principles apply. Yes. like role playing as a child is very powerful. And I feel that we don't use role plays enough in school, in education as a whole. But it's one of the best ways of learning to interact and work with people, because especially if you're like have one person who's playing the role of a child's not going to give you that objective, like you could have done this better, or I felt this when you said this. But an adult can. They can verbalize, what they're going through. And that skill of understanding like how people react to your words, it gives you this super skill. Like it's incredible. Like this is the exact same skill that we use, that we train for in closing, like for sales, right? So we just keep role playing with other people in a real sales situation. Because in a real sales situation, like if I'm on the phone, I'm trying to sell you something, I don't get feedback about like what you did right, what you did wrong. But in a role play, I do. And it's that reflective, like that reflection that is so powerful. So it's about like modeling this self-regulation. You're teaching your child that you're not perfect. Practice breathing and building that skill of articulating what we're feeling. Biting, especially among the really young this is very common around 2-year-olds, because they don't have the skills to express that I'm frustrated. They are trying, like, so for example, like biting their fingernails. I'm really frustrated, but they don't have the skills to self-regulate. They're trying to self-regulate by biting. So, Pudgy Boy says, I never do parenting special, the stuff I went through in the special ed class. Oh, yes. This is especially different. Like, appreciate you taking this seriously. Everyone mocks our family. Aw, seriously? Oh, like I feel for you, like people who are mocking your family, and especially like what people had to go through in special education. Hey, I feel you. For as a parent with ADHD who went undiagnosed until I was 40, the system is not set up for people who are not like do not fall into the neurotypical. We talk about this a lot, and I think it's important to recognize that, like, the people are much more than a grade on that test. They're much more than the neurotypical. Like, we have this expectation. In fact, being different is not always a bad thing. It means that you've got a superpower. I'd encourage you to look at Made by Dyslexia. They just talk about all these famous people. They all had like some kind of imperfection. It's like, who would want that for their child? And then you realize, oh, like all these famous actors, all these famous entrepreneurs, they all have dyslexia. Like, it normalizes it, but we don't see those heroes, right? We don't see people who are like us, and we need to. We need to see more people who are role models, who we can associate with. This notion of perfection is a sickness. It is, like, in our society, it's a sickness. Like, don't be a perfectionist. Be an improvementist. And I love that. Somebody was saying just the other day, I saw this on Instagram. No, not in Instagram, on TikTok. That there is this real kind of crisis happening on Instagram, because people were so used to these perfect photos on Instagram. And as a result, because of this pandemic and people are looking for more authenticity, they are abandoning. People are abandoning going to Instagram, and they're saying, "Oh, forget it. I'm going to go to TikTok or something more that feels more authentic, that feels more real." People are not looking for perfection. Perfection, like, you have to realize that this is a manufactured type of perfection that you see on Instagram. Doesn't mean that their lives are perfect. It just means that, like, they're showing you this very perfect snapshot of a very specific segment of some part of their lives that may or may not even be real. And I think more and more people are realizing that this is not reality. And like, why would you even want it to be that? Why would you even want that to be reality? Oh my God, I used to get whipped and locked in a closet at 7 to 8 years old, growing up in the military base and public school system. But I know one thing to teach a kid is that they will always be loved. It is you who are very true, buddy. Wow. My God. I can't imagine what you're going through, but yeah. Well, that's not completely true. I mean, like we parent how we were parented, right? And like Asian parents, like it was you do, like you will do what I tell you to do, or there will be beatings. And for me, I tell my kids, it's like, yeah, it was the stick. It was the stick for me. And I tell my kids, like, I never want that to happen to you. But as a result, like for me, it's hard for me to not go to that immediately to the punishment. Does that make sense? Like I am wired since my childhood to parent that way. And so yeah, I do everything I can consciously to avoid it, but without knowing better, knowing other practices, like learning from other people, like reading books and going to these courses and building up the skill, forget it. Forget it. You will become literally a picture of who your parents were. Like that's scary. That's scary to me. And that like we pass the baton on, and what part of that baton do we want? For my wife, it's like just realizing that certain types of experiences remind her of how she was punished when she was a child, and that when I do those things, it's a trigger for her. And I'm like, oh my god, I didn't realize I was doing those things. Right? Like for me, it was like, wow, this is so much better than being hit. But like, say, putting them in the car, or like saying, yeah, we're gonna have a time in, that was traumatic for her because that's how she was. She grew up. And so it was this discussion that I had to have with my own kids. And seriously, like I'm applying this stuff. I'm still learning today, but it's like, what should I do? Right? Like, what do you think I should do? What do you think is reasonable? And giving them more agency, giving them more control over what the punishment could be or what it should be. It's like, I can't control you. I can control the environment, but I cannot control you. So, okay, let's say you, in the morning, you want to go and eat like the whole bag of chocolate. Like they would take a box of like chocolate chip cookies. I'm going to eat all of it. Or I'm going to eat like 10 cookies. You know what? I cannot control you waking up earlier than me and then going and eating a whole box of like some cookies. But what can I do? I can toss that box of cookies. I can just not have cookies in my house. Or I can, you know what? If I need to put like we were just talking about this today, it's like I cannot change my kids, but I can change the environment that they live in. I could put a lock on our pantry. I can change out that like the door and put a lock on it. If that's what I need to do, I can do that. That's way easier than, having this fight. And I always talk about the mornings. Your mornings are so critical for the rest of your day. If you wake up and you're like, the first thing is you're angry because your kid did something in the morning, because the mornings are freedom for them. The mornings is when they can do what they want. You're not gonna have a great day. You're gonna have a really terrible day. And so it was all like this past week has all been about reflecting about, wow, what are those things that kind of screw up the mornings for us that make us feel like we've got like just not a great morning. So, love it. Brienne asked, what kind of camera are you using to stream with right now? It's a 5D Mark II, but I mean, I would suggest if you're going to invest in anything, Brienne, don't bother with cameras, just lights, like ring lights. I've got lots of lights. That's the thing that makes a difference, not the camera. Oh, wow. Sorry. Okay. Freddie says, watch the movie Matilda. I will. Thank you, Freddie. I appreciate that. I love having suggestions like this. I just watched The Blind Side just the other day. It's crazy. Like I just watched it with my wife, and we were just saying how there's just so many like very interesting symbols there in that movie. The Blind Side is like, yes, on one side, like he's the football player and everything, but like you need a person to protect you in order to thrive, right? Like you need a person who's covering your blind side. And we as parents are supposed to be there. We are supposed to be that blind side. But often we're not. We're the opposite. So, sometimes during family functions, we will wear diapers with him to make him more comfortable. I usually draw the line at a pacifier, though. Oh, hey, you know what? creating the environment where it's normal. Like it's such an odd experience. Like I love that. I really appreciate you saying that. My nephew, he's going on the 8th of July, where he's diagnosed as autistic, and I'm trying to get him out now to learn life skills and take him out to the wilderness and water. I love that. So he's glued to the gaming system. He refuses to write, so it's hard to get him to learn. His mom is lazy, so I don't want to teach him anything. Okay, yeah. So, Pudgy Boys, I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's one of the reasons why I started AI parenting, is this notion that the screen time is not necessarily bad. We just need to come up with a new definition of screen time, moving from sedation to relation and ultimately to creation. And that everybody has interests. And those interests, it's like the screen isn't what causes your interest. Like you're interested internally on things, and you need to do things in order to like meet those interests. And so it's about relating to their interests first, and then being able to create the future that you want. And if that's like, yeah, how can I, like, it's about asking the question, how can I relate their interest to the outdoors? How can I relate the interest to going on a hike, or enjoying like something near the stream, or going and walking along the river? That is the challenge for us these days. It is not that parents really were super into playgrounds when we were growing up. It was that they cared about us, and they cared about the friends that we were hanging out with. For some people, like the playground, it's now digital, it's online. And so what does that mean? Like, it's about knowing who they are, and it's about seeing what your interests are, how you're going to react. So there's a lot of stuff there. Anyways, I really appreciate all of you. This has like been an eye-opening experience for me that has caused me to reflect a lot about what am I doing, and why am I doing it this way? And it's kind of helped me understand that with all of this technology stuff that we talk about, at the end of the day, there's still a human part. There's still an emotional part. We as humans, like we grow up and we get all this programming from our own parents. And literally, like when we talk about decolonizing, we're not even talking about like, oh, we're gonna like change society and we're gonna go and protest. No, none of it was about that. It was all about decolonizing our own minds, our own families. And so that's all the time I have for today. I appreciate you. I will see you guys again next week. I still have more stuff to cover, so maybe I'll do another live stream soon. But today is my wife and I's 12-year anniversary, 12 years of marriage, and we're going to be celebrating it today, going out for dinner. And so appreciate you. Thank you.